Hey guys, welcome to the Best Practices Show, where we take a look at the best business practices from the best dental practices all over the country. I'm Kirk Behrendt. I'm your host this week. And I want to say this, if you're showing up for the first time, I'm going to give you two things. Number one, thank you for showing up for a great community of people that we always just love to keep learning. And today is no exception. You're going to learn some great stuff with one of the toughest questions I get all the time, which is, should I rent or should I buy when it comes to a new location and my practice? And I've got two incredible experts to help us answer some of those questions. You're going to love this. And number two, if you're here for the first time, I'm just going to ask you to subscribe wherever you subscribe to podcasts, whether it be iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, wherever, so that you can keep showing up and we'll keep bringing you a great expert every single week. Also, we here at the Best Practice Show take great show notes. You're going to see our team will write up everything that we talk about. Whatever Austin and Nate share with us, we're going to put in links and you'll be able to go back and reference that. You'll also be able to see how to get in touch with them. Keep sending us suggestions for shows. I got a couple more today. I really appreciate that. We're just going to line this up all next year and just keep bringing you guys the things that you want to see. Now, I want to introduce my guest today. I don't even really know you guys other than we were introduced by Dr. Ashton Prince. And I love Ashton. He does a lot. He's like, no, these guys know exactly what they're doing. They help me. And today we're going to be talking about a very important topic because I've got this, as a coach, I get this question all the time. And I have for years and years and years. A dentist will say, I'm looking to buy a practice or move my location. What do you do about real estate? Do I rent? Do I buy? And I'm like, it depends. And so we're going to go a little bit further than the depends answer today because you guys are the insight behind these solutions. But I want you guys to introduce yourselves. I always love our guests to know who we're talking to. So Austin, Nate, who wants to go first? Tell us a little bit about you guys and what you guys do.
Yeah, sure. I'll go first. I'm Austin Hare. And, just my background is I was a professional wakeboarder for about 12 years. And then during that time, I started buying some residential real estate and I turned those into Airbnbs. And then I started buying and opening up some gyms. I did that for a little while. And about the time that I kind of started to get over that and looking to sell, I was introduced to Nate. He invited me to my first Tony Robbins event. We went to Business Mastery together and we just hit it off and it was a great time. And then I decided to sell all those gyms. And then we started working together full time on commercial real estate and just combining our knowledge and our world experiences together. And so that's kind of how we got introduced.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Nate, how'd you get into this?
Yeah, he's got a much cooler story than me. I've been in real estate my entire life. My best friend's dad growing up did commercial real estate. I knew that's what I wanted to do. I was fortunate enough coming out of college to apprentice with a guy whose focus was transitioning toward healthcare from retail. And so we kind of, for the last 13 years, we've kind of really focused in this retail healthcare niche. We did the first 8 or 9 years almost exclusively in the urgent care space. I've done 400 or 500 urgent cares in 40 some states over the last number of years. And maybe 4 or 5 years ago, kind of got some initial exposure to the DSO world. And we started to evaluate and see the similarities in the retail healthcare practices that we were doing and what dental was wanting to do. And so we started to kind of add that and learn more about it. So that's kind of my story.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Now I got a list of questions and I'm going to ask you the tough ones because I don't know how to answer them. So we'll go there, but I always want to talk about the why before we get into the how. And Nate, you were mentioning this before we went live, like COVID has screwed things up in a lot of different senses. But before we get into like the ins and outs of real estate for a dentist, how has COVID disrupted the real estate market from your perspective?
Yeah, it's a good question. And it's really, truthfully, it's an evolving answer. When you look at this current season that we're in and you reflect on some of the more recent recessions or things that we've maybe all lived through. What's unique about this experience or the amount of incentives provided by the government and the banks to help kind of support people for this time. And so, so I think we're kind of almost still in the shock phase, if you call it that. I mean, certainly you're already seeing an increased number of bankruptcies, increased vacancy, businesses that were struggling prior to COVID or even more struggling now. And so, a lot of things are changing and a lot of things are going to be changing. And so I think it's kind of an evolving question. What we think, certainly it's a disruptor, but we really are kind of taking the viewpoint of it's more of an accelerator. I think it's just going to continue to accelerate changes that were kind of already happening as more traditional retail and shopping continues to go online, just happening at a faster pace, right? People aren't as comfortable going to stores, being in stores. They're doing it online. Companies are transitioning to smaller store footprints, reducing the number of actual stores, increasing their office and online, their warehouse and online capacities. So I think you're seeing a lot of transitions in that. And, for us and for a lot of our clients who predominantly occupy kind of that higher end retail space, even though they're healthcare users, we're really excited because we think, real estate that's been difficult, you have a couple different items, right? I mean, different geographies in different parts of the country have had different adaptations of healthcare and retail, right? So you go in the Midwest or Texas, it's very common to see healthcare and retail. You go to California, it's still not that common, right? So I think you're going to have just that continued evolution where retail owners are going to be more accepting of healthcare in their shopping centers and in their buildings. And then there's going to be more of that prime space available. And then certainly we hope that it'll be a little less expensive, right? I mean, it's going to disproportionately affect the different classes of retail, right? So if you have A, B, C, if you kind of grade out through some denomination, the level or quality of retail sites, right? COVID's going to have it's not going to have an equal disruption on all those, right? Because, there are going to be people who were historically in B, C, and D real estate that are going to upgrade. So your lower end areas are certainly going to be hit the hardest, but yeah, in the areas that we're targeting or want to be, we're hopeful that medical will continue to be more accepted and hopefully more desirable and maybe a little bit more affordable that, as these retail landlords continue to kind of accept.
Right. Another thing, that we didn't even think about is the sub-market. Like that's gone crazy too. And the money behind real estate is going to be less forgiving. If you're paying rent right now, your landlord's probably saying, hey, look, I'll work with you for a while, but we got to figure things out too. So there's all this complexity. So I could even see having you guys back for a multi-series on this. But I do want to cover this one topic because I do get this question a lot. I'm going to play the role of a dentist. I'm 32. I'm coming to you, Nate, Austin. Okay, listen, I'm thinking about buying or renting. What should I consider? And I also have a growing practice. I got kids, I got a dentist, I got a practice that I'm trying to work. Like where would I even start? Give me some things that I want to be thinking about.
Yeah. So I think, is another question without a simple answer. You have to kind of identify kind of long-term and short-term strategies, right? We have to understand, not just from the physical characteristics of the location, like is the location going to be viable for 10 or 15 years? Because as I think about opening and practicing here, and someday am I going to sell it? What do I do with the building? If my intent is to keep the building and then rent the building to the new owner, I'm gonna want him to sign a long-term lease for another 10 years. So is this location now viable for 20 or 25 years? So you've got kind of like the physical trade area components to it. Then you have kind of some more of the pragmatic components where it's, what is the best use of my capital, right? I mean, what are my goals as an operator, right? Do I want to have a single office? Do I want to have multiple offices? And so that's a lot of what we try to walk people through is really to try to find the best strategy for their situation, right? And their use and access to capital, right? Because, not everybody starts at the same point, right? I mean, you might be a starting dentist coming from a wealthy family where you have the ability to play in the real estate game. You may be a starting dentist and you're first generation success. So you've got to make decisions that have a different set of kind of circumstances behind them. So, I think we want to look at all those things, and really the most important thing is just optimizing the value of your lease in the real estate, right? Because the fundamental of commercial real estate is it's really only worth what it is, what it generates in income, right? And so the rent you're paying, the term of the lease that you're willing to commit to the site, you as a medical user are typically deemed more credit worthy, and certainly as you grow and scale, you become more and more credit worthy. So really just trying to maximize the value of your lease in that physical space, and really just trying to make sure that all those components align with our goals, right? And then ultimately so you got to have some goal in mind, and then then trying to find the right real estate that complements that goal, right? And having the ability to kind of adapt or modify kind of what you want based on what's actually available, right? Because we've been involved or witnessed so many times where people took the wrong site because it was the right deal, right? Well, how did that work out, right? You sacrificed tons and tons of patient volume, exposure, signage because you could buy the building instead of renting one. You save $5 or $10 a foot in rent, and so really just trying to balance and make sure that you kind of have to run them as independent business strategies, right? And is what's best for the practice also what's best for the real estate play. Sometimes that works hand in hand. Sometimes it's not the same answer, and so just really trying to kind of understand and best navigate those different circumstances.
Yeah, absolutely. And you guys mentioned, part of your business model is, the strategy behind it. It's not so much it's really figuring out what is going to work before you actually make the decision and pull the trigger. But you said something, I love what you said. Talk about the data analytics behind patient flow and location. Like, is there any science for that? Like, you guys get to see all this stuff. I know when they build a Starbucks here, there's a ticker tape across the road, and they're measuring how many cars are actually and turning right. Is there any science in dentistry that could help us understand? Because I shared this with you guys. I've been doing this a long time. When I got started, people all said, building a practice, it's three things: location, location, location. How true is that today? And is there any analytics behind it?
Yeah. So, I mean, we would fall on the side of it's very true. If you look at your bigger companies that spend hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars a year to understand the success of every practice. I think what's unique in healthcare compared to a Starbucks or a sandwich shop is ultimately you can have a good doctor and a good business and still have a successful practice in a bad location. There's certainly more components of operating a healthcare business that create loyalty and the ability for patients to drive. But the goal is to find a way to get both, right? To have good operations and to have really kind of accelerated operations through those right real estate practices, and the analytics is such an important component of it, right? So we build kind of custom analytics for all of our clients. Obviously, every dentist doesn't serve the same patient, right? And they may be looking for a different patient profile. They may be pedo based. They may be looking for some type of specialty. They may have a different insurance profile that they try to cater to, right? So you have to kind of understand the right demographics you need to look for to identify all of those groups of people, right? And then when you kind of get past the demographic components, then we start to look at the kind of the synergistic user components, right? So are my patients the same patients that go to Starbucks, eat at Chipotle, utilize Kroger versus Walmart or Target versus Walmart, right? And start to identify the parts of town and the geographies that kind of align with what our goals are. And then it's really looking in those specific trade areas to understand the competitive components of it, right? So, as we're looking at different areas, how do the competitors present themselves in different areas, right? A lot of people look for, maybe a population to dentist ratio of 1 to 2,000. So obviously with that as a baseline, are there parts of town that exceed that benchmark that are kind of underserved from a dental standpoint? Or, it's some of the bigger operators that we've had the opportunity to work with look at, if we go into an area, maybe the saturation levels are what they are, but who is in that competitive group that we can discount, right? Who is located poorly, who's got no physical presence. We didn't talk about this before the call, but we look at online ratings and reviews, right? So do you have you talked about physical location being important, but do you have a digital location that's important? And if you're hidden in both those realms, we almost take you off the list, because even though you're there, if we can grab a great location and we can push that exposure through our physical real estate and our digital real estate, we think there's a compelling reason to look at that, right? And that's what we try to help really think about, whether it's a new location, reposition of existing assets, looking at an acquisition to say, okay, hey, we're taking on 5 or 8 new clinics, and how are they positioned relative to meet our long-term goals, right? And from a competitive landscape, who are the regional or national players in our market who, if they're not competing directly with us, will be soon, right? And where do we need to go to ensure that we have that most defendable spot?
Yeah, that digital location thing, that is so good what you just said, because that is so true. I used to joke with dentists, look, I can walk outside your door with a pad of paper. I'll come back with 200 names within walking distance of people that don't even know you exist. You should have a website. You should let people know where you're at in those whole things. And I love that you guys take that all into consideration.
Yeah. And, I know you asked, what is there like an exact science to it? And, the short answer to that is no, that there's not really. There's a lot of scientific data that goes into it. But at the end of the day, it's really a combination of learning how all those different metric points apply together to pick the best site. And so it comes with experience, right? It just comes with doing this multiple times over and over and over again. And it's crazy, how many people, for dentists, this is one of the most important decisions you'll ever make in your life, because the cost of build out is so high. I think it's the highest out of any indry per square foot rise, right? So
what is it right now? I don't even know.
I think it's 185. Nate, do you know?
Yeah, totally geographical and operator dependent based on level of finish, labor expense. But yeah, it could be as cheap as $100, could be up to $200. Depending on where in the world you're doing
per square foot.
Right.
So really, it adds up, right? You can do the math depending on how big your facility is. And so there is a lot of data that goes into it. And I like to give people kind of just benchmarks. Nate mentioned one earlier, one practice for every 2,000 people that live there. Income typically between 40,000 and 100,000, simply because once income gets too high, that just means they're really, really spread out. And you like a pretty dense population area on, roads that have good traffic, but maybe not 4-lane roads each way, because then it becomes inaccessible because it's actually too congested. So, and it's amazing, how many people will use a broker to help them find a location that is their golfing buddy or their cousin or, their brother-in-law or whatever, simply because it's easy and it's convenient. And these, a lot of times they might have zero experience. This might be the very first time they've ever done a dental user. And so I just think it's important to, either A, you do all this research yourself, and you probably should do that anyway, or B, make sure you use somebody who has a lot of experience. I would say at least 10 plus deals done in your specific industry.
Right. Also too, when it comes to this whole thing, now, again, I've been in this industry for a long time. The retail space has been turned on its head. It used to be no, as a dentist, you'd never go in retail space. But now I've walked into a few of our, I'm like, this is gorgeous. And they're like, oh my gosh, it's fantastic. Can you talk about the change in that when it comes to making your next move?
Yeah. The retailization of healthcare is something that I've spent a lot of time conferences talking about. The bottom line is consumers and patients are becoming less loyal and more convenient driven, right? I had a mentor of mine relate kind of the future of healthcare to where he felt like fast food was in the 50s and 60s. It was all mom and pop operators, random places here, there, not really accessible, easy to find. And then what happened is, chains came in and commercialized things, made it more convenient, more accessible, more consumer friendly, and it totally changed it. And so I think we're seeing that a lot in healthcare, right? It's convenient to, and a lot of it's awareness driven, right? A large percent of the population doesn't proactively utilize a dentist like they should, right? A lot of it is, hey, oh, my mouth hurts a little bit, I need to find a dentist. So the idea is, hey, when I have that thought, where do I need to be to capture, oh yeah, where I go to the grocery store every week, there's a dentist in the plaza, right? And so it's easy. Now, sure, they got to, do they have the insurance? I mean, there's other qualifying questions that'll be answered, but it's, hey, how do we get that exposure so that we are top of mind, that in a moment of need, they come to us, right? And I think that's just what's so unique. And I think as you look at, and that's what's got us so excited about dental, because in other healthcare verticals, like I mentioned, a lot of the focus, because it's new healthcare or a new version of healthcare, it's all de novo growth based, right? I think while dental has a lot of de novo opportunity left, I think what's most exciting about it is the opportunity to reposition, right? You have the ability to take a strong, stable practice, great provider, good patient base, and when the right times come up with your lease and expiration and all that, then move that to a prime location so you can compound the value of the established mature location and the ability to really compete for all these new patient visits that are largely derived from this kind of retail accessibility of healthcare. So and you see it with, if you look at all the major dental players, right? I mean, that it's what they're doing, right? It's not rocket science, right?
Yeah. I like the whole premise of this because, in our industry, you can be tainted by self-interested education, which is build your practice. And then you hear this, if you build it, they will come, which is like, oh gosh, here we go. But I was mentioning to you guys before, I know a dentist who passed on building, had a great little boutique practice. He goes to Italy a couple weeks a year. And when it came time to move, he could absorb another practice easily in that whole thing. And it was very easy to turn that around. And I think you said it before, like it all comes down to, like, at the end, how can you best maximize your return on investment? And if I had him on the show, he'd be like, I'm glad I didn't buy because I put my money elsewhere and I made a ton. And I also was able to do it. We see a lot of dentists speculate by going, I'll build this and then I'll build out 7 more ops. I'm like, do you have a doctor for that? And they're like, no. And I'm like, have you ever had an associate? They go, no. And I'm like, oh, that's interesting. You know what I mean? So they're doing it on speculation. And then they're also those same ones that call me and go, man, it's expensive when you need a new parking lot. And man, I haven't found a rent and I lost an associate. And I'm like, okay, you're probably not the guy that should have built that all. So, because you can get into that situation and they do it on borrowed money. They don't do it on cash. So like there's downfall. And that's why having an expert like you guys is always important, figuring this out. What other pitfalls do you see or myths when you talk to dentists when they say, is real estate headed this way?
Well, the other, we talked about it a little before, and I don't think we've talked about it yet on the show, but, I think the other cost is that, that retail real estate's not affordable. Certainly there's some line you have to draw somewhere. There's some amount of money that's not worth it. But, we talked about it a little bit before, but, if you have the opportunity to take an A location versus a C location, right, and whatever physical characteristics you deem relevant, and maybe the gap there is $8 or $10 a foot over a few thousand feet. I mean, you're talking about in actual days you're open, maybe $100 a day, right? What's a new patient? What's the lifetime or annual value of a new patient? Maybe it's $300-400. So can I see an extra quarter or half a patient a day because I'm going to put myself in this highly prominent location? So we think about it. I think I mentioned before on 2 aspects, right? Like, what is the real estate going to do that's going to add rocket fuel to our ability to grow? And then what is real estate going to do that's going to keep us the least vulnerable to being outpositioned by a competitor, right? Because you can't, if somebody's going to come compete with you, you can't stop them, but we can make sure that at least at this point in time, we make the best decision for the most defendable location, right? To where if somebody did want to compete with us, they maybe have to do it from an inferior location, which you can't prevent. We just have to make the best decisions we can with what we do, on our side of the table.
Yeah. So I think, the myth would be, oh, I can't afford to pay that much in rent, right? That's what you think initially going into it. The reality is you can't afford not to a lot of times, because if you just want to break it down into simple math, what happens is rent is a relatively small proportion of your expenses. And so it can seem overwhelming when you think about the multiple that it increases. And what I mean by that is it might be 5 to 7% of your overall expenses, and you're paying $3,000 a month, right? Well, if you increase from $3,000 to $10,000 a month, that is over triple. Okay. And that's like overwhelming when you look at those numbers. But as a percentage of your revenue, now it's going from 5 to 15%, you know, and I mean, as in a percentage of your expenses, right? So it's not that much of an increase, but the effects of that can increase your revenue by 50%, sometimes 100%. I mean, we've seen that a lot. These are real numbers. And so the question you have to ask yourself is, how much do I have to pay per acquisition of a new patient? And am I going to be paying more or less money each month in my rent to get more or less clients? So if you are paying, if let's just say it costs you $200 to get a new client, right? And obviously that's going to take some data and like having really good bookkeeping on your end. But let's just say you figure out your marketing in, then it's cost $200, and there's a place that's in a prominent retail spot. Okay. And it's going to be an extra $2,000 a month, like just as an example. Well, that's like 10 new patients a month that you have to get as a result of that spot. What are the odds that you're going to get 10 new patients? Probably really, really good, right? And so it's just having again, we talked about metrics earlier, we talked about clarity, having those metrics so that you can have clarity over your decision, because usually like the increased cost of the rent is way, way worth it in terms of new patient acquisition.
Yeah, it's a lot to consider. And then you mentioned also too, you know, doing the homework before you do that. With all that and consider what you said, Austin. You know, you guys work with DSOs too. So a lot of people that watch this, they're private care practitioners, single operators, but DSOs will often do a lot of homework. And then what's the percentage of spaces that they walk away from? Like, it's pretty high.
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you know, our rule of thumb is 2 to 3 times the number of areas we want to evaluate for sites we want to do. And then when you get to the physical real estate, you know, maybe 3 to 4 buildings we evaluate for every one that we do. Right. So when you go, you know, it may start with looking at 5 areas and 3 or 4 sites in each area to ultimately do 2 locations. You know, I mean, just because you have to be able to really adequately, you know, evaluate what's going on and what the best options are, and have, just like you said, have the kind of the strength to say no to an average opportunity to just make sure you get the best one available, right? And that's why, you know, so much what we like when we work with the multi-unit operators is having that kind of market map that says, okay, you know, these are the areas that are interesting to us, and we're going to kind of, certainly some of those may be higher priorities than others, but we're going to kind of let the right opportunities dictate the order in which we open locations in those markets, right? Because we don't want to take a bad site in a good area to ultimately just never do as well as we should.
Yeah. I also think you probably got this stat in there. Like, it's an hour and a half from your house, dude. You know, like I hear that one too. Like, people, they bought a practice for an opportunity, but they have 2 little kids and it takes them an hour and a half to get there and back because their spouse didn't want to. I'm like, okay, you can look at that as a financial investment, but being married is probably a more stable investment for you long term. So I like looking at the life piece too. This is so great. What other things would I need to know, or when it comes to this, and making a decision whether I rent or own? Anything else coming to mind?
Yeah. Well, I think the only other thing I would say is, you know, some component of the strategy, like it's very simple from the context of assuming there's an available space that's perfect I can rent, or there's an available piece of land or building I can buy that I can just, you know, the question kind of assumes those are the options, right? When the reality is that's probably neither one of those are going to be true as you evaluate, right? And so really having a lot of creativity to look at, I think I mentioned before we're on the call, you know, we're doing a number of projects right now that were initiated by our healthcare client, but, you know, I think I mentioned to you like 3 of them specifically. We're also putting Starbucks in the development, right? Because the land was bigger than what we needed for just a 3,000 foot dental use or whatever it may be, right? So I think the ability to also be creative and kind of see more of, or at least have the partner and team to see more of what could be there, not just what's there today. And trying to come up with a plan of, you know, hey, if perfect is 3,000 square feet, freestanding building that could be bought or leased, but that's not available. Like, how do we recreate that, or how do we get the closest version of that in the most economical way?
Yeah, I think it's, go ahead.
Yeah, I was
Austin.
going to say, so like priority number one should be location over like whether you're going to rent or whether you're going to buy. I mean, should be what you're looking at. Which location is going to best serve my needs to help me become the most profitable? And then so you kind of have to have this hierarchy so you can help make better decisions, right? And then after that, the question is, okay, well, now let's assume all things are equal and we have two equally good locations. One is you got to rent, one is you got to buy it, or you have the option to. Well, what are your long-term plans? And the easiest way to distinguish it for me and for Nate and I, we talk about this on one of our podcasts in detail, but it's, are you planning on growing to multiple locations or not? Because if you are planning on having one location, a lot of times real estate is a good investment, right? Like if you're going to be there for a really, really long time, it's a way that you can diversify. However, it is going to tie up a lot of your capital. Every single business is constrained by the amount of capital it has, regardless of the industry. I mean, Bill Gates was quoted as saying, like, how much money do you need in order to feel confident or like to not have any stress about money? And he said 12 months of operating expenses in the bank account for Microsoft, right? Like not him personally, but Microsoft. And that's the richest man in the world, or at one point it was. And so, we have to be conscious of where we're spending our capital. And so if you want to grow, that's going to cost capital if you want to buy new locations, and it might not be best spent up in your real estate. Or like Nate talked about earlier, if it is, it could be more short-term, right? Because you drive the value of the real estate as the tenant. And so an empty building, commercial real estate is very different than residential. An empty building in residential doesn't matter, right? Nobody cares who lives there. It's all about the location. In commercial, it's all about the tenant, the credit, and what they're paying. And so if you can buy an empty building and you sign a lease to yourself, you have drastically increased the price of that building, right? And so if you immediately sell that, you will get the highest ROI short-term. You've kind of created this arbitrage on the value of that building. Now you can hold it and continue to make an ROI, but your ROI as a percentage goes down over time because you created so much value year one. So I hope I'm not overwhelming you, but those are kind of like that's kind of like the lens that we look through to help make that decision.
Yeah, it's a lot to consider. And I love what you guys said. Your goal is to be a third party real estate expert on your team without the overhead, which I think is that's music to my ears if I'm a dentist. So I know that people, now you guys do more than just this. You actually negotiate leases, you do all that kind of stuff. So you don't have to buy a building or build a location. You'll help with some of the minor details, right?
Yeah, soup to nuts, and anything, just like you said, basically real estate department without the overhead. So renewals, lease modifications, any type of lease negotiation, and then certainly as it comes into development and real estate financing and how to maximize the value, as Austin was talking about, of your lease. Yeah, any and all of that is kind of what we do. Our focus is really kind of providing the smaller operators with the bigger company solutions, right? Bigger company type resources, and just trying to help everybody accomplish their goals.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and we're happy to do a free portfolio analysis as well for anybody who's interested.
That's what I was going to ask you. And then I know the people that are listening, for the benefit of people that aren't watching the video or listening on iTunes, how the heck do I find out about you guys? Like, what's the name of your company? And I also know that you have a podcast. So I haven't listened to it yet, but I will. But how can I find you guys?
Yeah, everything is kind of conglomerated on our website. It's Real Estate University, and the web address for that is reuniversity.org. And that has all of our podcasts. The podcast name is Commercial Real Estate Secrets. So it sounds vague, like it applies to all commercial real estate. It kind of does, but we've had a ton of focus in healthcare and specifically a ton of focus in dental. We have a ton of guests on there from dental. And then, of course, if you want to send me an email, my email is just ahair, because my last name is Hair, like hair on your head. So Austin Hair, ahair@leadersre.com, like leaders, re is in real estate.com.
Yeah, and that's not fair because you got good hair. You probably put gel in it too. I've never had hair my whole life,
Wow.
So it's all good stuff. I really appreciate this, guys. This has been fantastic. And there's no doubt I'd love to have you back and just talk about some of the mechanics of even negotiating. Like, what should I be thinking about when it comes to long-term negotiating? Because I find a lot of dentists just say yes to the first thing that they're given. And I'm like, oh my gosh, you didn't even take some of the stuff.
Hours and hours talking about all the different components of a proposal and a lease. And yeah, happy to happy to provide any wisdom or thoughts that you feel helpful.
Yeah, and especially right now, it's relevant because you've got all these government programs because of COVID, and so if you haven't renegotiated your lease and you've been on it for a while, then it's a good time to renegotiate or at least negotiate something, right? Because like you mentioned this earlier, but the landlords are in a hard spot, okay, and like we had to be considerate of them too, but also they are getting leniency like from these government programs, the same as some of the business practices are. And so I know some people think like, my business is doing great, I don't need any handouts, blah, blah, blah. And that's great. And that's awesome. But are you maximizing, are you leaving money on the table? Right. And so if you just signed your lease, in the last 6 months or 8 months or even 9 months, you might be kind of screwed. But if it's been earlier than that, then there are some opportunities for you.
Yeah, that's awesome. I really appreciate this, guys. So thank you guys for coming on today, and stick around while I say goodbye to everybody else. But thank you guys for watching and listening to the Best Practices Show. If you enjoyed today, just do us a favor, hit the share button, share with your friends. Keep sending us suggestions for things that you guys want to see, whether it be from Nate or Austin, whatever. I would love, here's one. I would love to hear some of the most creative things you've ever seen when it comes to what dentists have done. I get a couple of them every once in a while. I'm like, how did you think of that? And they're like, I just asked. And they're like, oh my gosh, that might be a fun podcast to do. But I'm going to encourage you guys to reach out to these guys, check out their podcast. I have no doubt it's a good one. And until we see you guys next time, keep watching the Best Practices Show. You guys enjoy the rest of your day.